Hello and welcome to another edition of Rural Reflections, Colin Dave, our podcast that is co-hosted by my brother Dave in Carrington, North Dakota, and me, Grant Nelson, right here in Thief River Falls, Minnesota. Hello, Dave. How are you doing today?
Hi, Grant. I'm doing pretty good. Warmed up a little since yesterday. Feels colder out because the wind is blowing, but we're doing fine here.
Well, that's good to hear. I'm glad that everything's going good out there. And how are the farmers doing? Are they still working away at crops out there?
Oh, yeah. They're still combining corn a little bit at a time. You know, you can't do a whole lot because it's still, most of it has to be dried. And you have to get a dozer out in the field and make a landing spot for the trucks and a way to get into the field, you know, because there's snowbanks around the edge. But they're doing a little here and a little there. I'm sure by next spring we'll be done.
Okay. Now, we just watched the Minnesota Vikings as they got into another postseason and then at the same time exited the postseason rather early.
Yeah, they are the Chicago Cubs of football, boy.
Yep.
I just, you have to be a faithful follower, otherwise you jump ship so fast. It's just not even funny because it's kind of a repeat all the time. The one team that I remember so much is the 99 team that Danny Green had, you know, and that was the biggest almost of my life, or at least of my recent life, watching them because they should have been Super Bowl bound and champions that year. But anyway, it didn't surprise me, and that was one of my fears after they beat the Saints. It's like, oh boy, now they took a big one out, and now they're going to flop this next weekend. And sure enough, they did.
Yeah, you know, it was exactly as expected, I thought. I mean, we had been talking about it earlier in the week, and I said, I don't think they're going to do very well. I mean, playing the Saints and beating them was basically our Super Bowl, and I think after that happened, they were kind of like, okay, that's all we can really do, and that's kind of where it seemed to get left on the field right there.
I know. I guess I'll still be watching them and feeling the pain, but I don't know. Took the Cubs 100 and some years, didn't it? So maybe in another 40, 50 years, the Vikings will make it too.
Yeah, I think we're playing the long game right now. I think for guys like you and me, we're hoping that we can see the Vikings win the Super Bowl before we die. I think that's our long game right now.
Yeah.
Now, I've been always doing a lot of projects at home, and I know you do a lot of projects yourself all the time, but I think we're both kind of a little bit project-less. And after you sold your 450 International tractor, what are you going to do? What's going to be the encore? What's next?
Oh, I don't know. I've been shopping for an International pickup, and you know, you sent me a picture of one. Is one I should have grabbed, excepting I didn't notice it or know about it until it was gone. But I'm still hunting for a little old International pickup, just a half ton in the 60s, and I don't know if I'll find it or not, but it gives me something to shop for or hunt for anyway. But I would kind of like to have that.
Gives a fella purpose. You know, I used to restore old John Deere snowmobiles, and over the weekend here at the Ice Fest, they had a snowmobile run here, a small vintage run. They're going to have another one here in February down in St. Hilaire. And every once in a while, I think about those. I think about the old Arctic Cat snowmobiles with the engine in the back and the manure slat tracks. I always think that would be kind of fun to have one of those.
Yeah, it is. And then after you have it and realize kind of how hard it steers and how clumsy it is and how, you know, all that stuff, it's really fun to look at and to have and to build, you know.
Yep.
But then it's kind of anticlimactic once you start running around with it, you know. You just have to have old memories that you're thinking about while you're running them, because they really aren't so nice riding. I mean, I hadn't ridden a snowmobile for about 10 years, and about 5 years ago, I jumped on a new Arctic Cat, and I took off across the lake, and it pretty near threw me off the back, and I was hitting snowdrifts, and I'm like, oh gosh, I better brace myself for this. Didn't even feel it, you know. So there's a whole difference in riding a snowmobile than there was back in those days.
Yeah, there's a reason why they improve snowmobiles over time. And, you get a lot of nostalgia for the old ones, and then you actually go ride one, and it's maybe not as great as you remember. The other thing, I've got a concept for a snowmobile, and that would be to take an old snowmobile like that, rebuild it, and use all modern components to even include a little bit more suspension. I've thought about that. And, I've thought about it for about 3 or 4 years, and I'm starting to think about it even less. So I have even more doubt than I started out with that it'll probably never happen.
Yeah, I know. It's a huge job. People do that with these old pickups, too. They'll take a chassis, complete chassis from something else, put the cab and the seats and whatnot on it so it looks like an old International or an old something or another, but it'll have all the modern features inside it of a, 2008, 2010, some kind of pickup,
Yep.
But it's a lot of work, and it's not for somebody with average tools,
That's for sure. Now, all this stuff that we like to do inside the shop is really just to get through winter. And you and I were talking before we got on the air here about winters back on the farm. Now, we both remember, I think probably what really stands out in our mind, as odd as it may sound, is our dad taking manure out to the field and spreading manure out in the middle of the winter.
Well, yeah, it was a daily job on the dairy farm, unless you wanted to have a frozen pile of it that you couldn't clean up until the middle of June or the 1st of July or something. But, yeah, it was a daily chore, and then after you got back in, you had to make sure the manure spreader and the tractor got into the barn, or the manure spreader got the chain freed up, and the tractor got back in the barn and stuff, so it wasn't froze up for the next day. I remember getting rides behind that on a sled, because it was about a quarter mile out to the field, so Dad would tie a sled on the back of the manure spreader and pull us kids out there with him, and then he'd go spread while we waited, and then hook us up again and drag us back up into the yard.
Now, one time he tried. One time he left you hooked up while he was spreading, and then that you decided you didn't like that so much, right?
Well, if you remember him, he would have threatened that many, many times. He would have made believe he was going to spread on you for sure.
Now, for those of you who don't know, like a barn cleaner is basically a trough behind the cattle made of concrete, and then there's a chain with paddles that circulates throughout the building and takes all the manure outside and dumps it into a manure spreader. And I was always kind of fascinated by that, Dave, for 2 reasons. One is that the chain always had to stop at the same place so it didn't freeze up. And then the power head on that thing was amazing. I mean, it was a big, heavy-duty electric motor and an even heavier gear reduction transmission. You remember that thing?
Oh, man, do I ever. And I remember listening to it hum and click and watching the pedals going around and even riding around on the pedals once in a while just to, screw around a little bit. But, yeah, I certainly do remember that thing. I remember when it wasn't there, too, and how whatever you scooped in front of the cows in the morning, you scooped out behind the cows the next day. So.
Pretty labor intensive without it, even though we may laugh about it now. It was a huge labor saver back then, especially at a cold time of the year. I remember actually it was pretty nice when it got really cold because you could pretty much go anywhere with the tractor.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I remember that too. And in the snow, you know where you were after you've been spreading, unless you get fresh snow, so you could always, put a nice even coating on out in the fields. Didn't have to pile it up all in one spot.
Made it that much nicer the next spring. All right, Dave. Well, it's nice always taking a trip down memory lane with you. Got anything else before I let you go?
I guess not. I'm just going to keep on my little quest for an old International pickup.
All right, that sounds good. We'll talk to you next week. Thanks, Dave.
All right, you got it.
Yep, and thanks everybody else out there for joining us for another edition of Rural Reflections, Colin Dave, right here on Thief River Falls Radio and online at trfradio.com.